When HP approached me about their latest gaming monitor, the HP Omen 27i, I was very much intrigued to see how it compared to over 160 different monitors I have previously tested. Now the 27i can be found for around £500 in the UK and around $600 in the US. If you're interested in purchasing the monitor, the locally link in the description below will take you to your localized Amazon store. Furthermore, down there you'll find some alternative monitors that you might want to consider, and you'll find out why throughout this review. As for the description box, there's also a link to my Instagram, so yes, it's a shameless plug. If you do use that social media platform, I'd very much appreciate a follow. It's at TotallyDubbed, and if you're interested in all electric or hybrid vehicles, do check out Totally EV. Your support would be greatly appreciated. So let's kick off this review and talk about these specs. Now this is a 27-inch 1440p monitor that runs at 165 Hz. It's also an IPS panel and furthermore has adaptive sync. Now a little note on adaptive sync, as someone who's reviewed a lot of monitors, it does get a little bit confusing. Now this is a G-Sync certified monitor. In other words, it will work with most or any NVIDIA graphics card that's GTX 10 series or above, running a DisplayPort cable and running the latest NVIDIA drivers. If, however, you have, let's say, a GTX 960 and you want to run NVIDIA G-Sync, you won't be able to, because this has not got a G-Sync module built in. It's in fact got an AMD FreeSync module built in, where NVIDIA have tested the monitor in order to work with G-Sync. Hopefully that makes sense. If you've got any questions, be sure to ask me down in the comments below. Now on the subject of connectivity, this monitor has a singular DisplayPort 1.2 input and HDMI 2.0 input. It's a shame that not to see more inputs available. So for example, if you're running a Blu-ray player, console and a PC, then unfortunately you're going to have to resort to, let's say, an HDMI switcher or something. Moving on from the ports, let's talk about the build quality. And here this monitor looks pretty nice. It's got a three-side borderless design and has got RGB lights which stem at the back and underneath the monitor. These can also be customized through the OSD, be it the software-based OSD or the hardware-based OSD that's available on the monitor. Now the LEDs aren't exactly bright enough to be like a Philips Hue monitor or like a TV, so therefore it won't illuminate that much at the back, but the one underneath the monitor, as it reflects off the rather odd shaped stand, what it means that you do get a bit of a reflection, and you can see where the stand design has been incorporated. Now on the subject of the stand, it's very sturdy and provides height and tilt adjustment only. Unfortunately, there's no pivot or rotating, swiveling adjustments over here, so it feels somewhat limited. Given the price of the monitor, I was expecting just a little bit more, well, adjustments that could be had. And now we get onto the OSD that can be accessed both in a software form and the hardware form, and the hardware form is what you can see right now. Now, in terms of this gaming section, you've got adaptive sync, response time, frame rate, which is just a number which pops up, and the message timer and crosshair as well. The external lighting is the lights which reside underneath the monitor and behind it, which you saw before. And in terms of the image section, I've got brightness set as 0. We'll touch upon how bright this monitor does get, but I've left it to 0 so that my camera picks up the monitor properly. Sharpness and image scaling there. In terms of color, you've got no dedicated sRGB mode, unfortunately, and that's purely because this monitor is really aimed at the DCI-P3 standard, and I've left it on its standard mode as a result, and we'll touch upon how that does. In terms of input, you can see I've got display port as selected. Power, as the name might suggest, the most important one over here is the power LED, which you can disable, which is the bottom right. The LED can be disabled. Menu, which you can assign buttons, and then a bit more information about the monitor. Now moving on, we've got the software-based OSD. This is via the Omen command center, which you can download for free. So here you can see the picture modes, which you've got, and you can flick through them. There's not much customization options that you can have over here, so you'll have to do that through the hardware-based OSD. The lighting option, which is a little bit more advanced, which is nice to see, and allows you to customize through static colors, or indeed through more, well, different type of colors if you want, if you're going to go for like more of a color cycle. And then through the display, that's to do with the numbers that I said before, like for example, if you enable or disable the FPS or the crosshair overlay, you can enable these as well, and it gives you a little bit of a preview as to how it is. In terms of response time setting, you can customize this as well straight through the monitor's software-based OSD, just very much like you have on the hardware-based OSD. Now with that out of the way, let's get on to image quality. And here I saw that the monitor was more tailored towards the DCI-P3 color space, than it is to the sRGB range. Here the monitor hits 99.9% of sRGB gamut coverage and 95% of DCI-P3, which might seemingly be good for the sRGB range. However, when you do look at its gamut volume, it's way overzealous in 149.7% of sRGB and hitting 106% of DCI-P3. So really, these figures should be both at 100%. Now, for those people who would understand these numbers, it is, well, impressive if you're going to be color editing or video grading in the DCI-P3 standard. If, however, you're looking at a monitor that's going to be pinpoint accurate in this sRGB range, this monitor truthfully isn't it. With an average delta E of around 3.14 and a maximum of 5.7 in its sRGB range, it's just not that great for editing in sRGB. However, if you do somehow edit in DCI-P3, then you'll find its average delta E is at 1.91 with a maximum of 4.07. Now, what does this mean to the average consumer and, let's say, gamers? Well, truthfully, the monitor just seems to pop in colors. Specifically, if you're going to be watching movies or even plugging, let's say, Blu-ray player or, let's say, a console, then the DCI-P3 standard will be utilized a little bit more than the sRGB web format. So what I'm trying to say over here is that while the HP monitor can't compete with other gaming monitors in its sRGB color accuracy, it is definitely an impressive screen to look at, and given its IPS panel provides fantastic viewing angles, you won't have any issue whatsoever looking at it or even sharing your screen with your other half or friends and family. Now, while color accuracy might not concern some people out there, its contrast ratio might be a little bit disappointing. Here I found it to be a little bit lackluster at around 940 to 1. Here I would expect an IPS panel to be hitting 1100 to 1200 to 1, specifically at this price range. Here, cheaper alternatives seem to do a better job, and I'm just a little bit disappointed by HP's performance in the contrast ratio. Now, as for brightness, the monitor does get pretty bright. While it's not a HDR certified monitor of any sort, it still does get to around just around 400 nits. So that is going to be really bright for most people in most users scenarios. I actually ended up using the monitor at around 45% brightness in a bright sunlit room. The lowest brightness that you can get to is 47 nits, which again is pretty dim. So therefore it means that the monitor has got a good range in terms of its brightness. What is seemingly unbelievable, however, is that this IPS panel very much suffers from very little backlight bleed. In terms of its brightness uniformity, it's pretty much perfect throughout the board. It does suffer in terms of my panel in the bottom left a little bit, but truthfully it's really impressive. In terms of the backlight bleed itself, in a very dark room you'll see very little backlight bleed. Now, while I do understand this can be panel lottery, and some people might have more severe backlight bleed and some other people will have near perfect ones, all I can base over here is passed off my experience, and through the monitors I've tested, this is one of the more impressive IPS panels out there that doesn't suffer as much of IPS backlight bleed as, well, other IPS panels out there. And why would this matter? Well, truthfully, if you're playing, let's say, dark games, you won't see kind of this grayish or, let's say, slightly whiter tones throughout the image. You'll see more of a uniform black tone. So it's great to see that this HP monitor does a great job in this domain. Now, while all of that is very interesting, the most important part here is its gaming performance. And unfortunately, the Omen 27i just didn't really impress throughout the range. Here, the monitor's input lag is not as low as some of its competitors. I mean, there are some 4K monitors actually that offer a lower input lag. So one that I recently reviewed from Asus. There's some 1440p monitors from Acer and BenQ, which are phenomenally low in terms of their low input lag. And also there's even 1080p 240Hz or 280Hz monitors out there which offer, again, lower input lag. What I'm trying to say over here is that while its input lag isn't exactly the worst, it is not exactly the best either, and at this price tag I'd really expect pretty much pure perfection. In terms of its response time, here it's severely affected by the amount of inverse ghosting you get at the highest overdrive setting. In this respect, the monitor in its highest overdrive setting has a lot of inverse ghosting, to the point where even if you're playing a non-graphically intense game like Counter-Strike, you will notice a lot of smearing occurring, meaning the game becomes somewhat unplayable. Tone it down, however, then you will be able to game on this monitor, but at the expense of having a less responsive monitor. Some other monitors out there suffer from the same sort of fate, but in this type of price tag, I would again expect a monitor to be able to run its highest overdrive setting without any sort of caveats. So unfortunately, its response time might seemingly be really low on paper, and furthermore via some calibration tools and things like that. But when it comes to real world gaming experience, you'll find yourself that the Omen 27i just can't compete with, well, a lot of its alternatives. On the plus side, this monitor does run up to 165 Hz at 1440p, which is really nice to see, although I think most people will completely struggle to see the difference between 165 Hz or 144 Hz. Truthfully, I feel it's just a little bit of an extra marketing ploy rather than actual gaming gain that you're going to get. Let's say if you're going to go for 240 Hz and get that smoothness at 240 Hz versus 144 Hz. Now there's loads of differences between the two as well, but anyway, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is 165 Hz isn't going to really set your world alight. On the plus side, the monitor is G-Sync compatible, and through my tests I had no issues running my RTX 2080 Super connected over DisplayPort, running the latest NVIDIA drivers, and running the NVIDIA Pendulum demo without any sort of artifacts or black screens. Just again, worth bearing in mind that if you do have a GTX 9 series card or below, then you won't be able to benefit from the G-Sync compatible certificate, shall we say, because it doesn't have a G-Sync module built in. So this all leads me on to my verdict. What do I make about the HP Omen 27i? Well, the problem here is that this monitor is somewhat mediocre in terms of performance and yet very premium in terms of its price tag. At £500/$600, there are far greater monitors out there on the market that will not only appeal to casual gamers, but also competitive gamers like myself. If you're a competitive gamer, you should consider monitors from Acer and BenQ. If you're a casual gamer, you might want to consider alternatives from, let's say, AOC, Philips, or indeed Samsung for specifically their HDR performance. And if you want kind of a best of both worlds, then there is some other monitors out there which are fantastic. Even ultra-wide monitors can come in at a cheaper price than this HP Omen do. What I'm trying to say here is that I just can't see where HP's pricing has come from and truly competes with the rest of the market. It just doesn't make any sense to me for someone who's living in the UK. While this might not apply to some other people who live elsewhere, in the UK at least, this monitor is far overpriced, and for its lackluster performance throughout gaming and even image quality, I just can't see why someone would buy this over its alternatives. But that's just my thoughts and my experience after having reviewed 160 odd monitors. Let me know in the comments below what you make of the HP Omen 27i, or furthermore what you make of it after watching this review. If you've got any comments, do let me know in the comments below. That's what it's used for. I'm very much intrigued to hear your thoughts. And furthermore, if you do like this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more and all that good stuff. And of course, favorite and share to continue helping the channel grow. Alright guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care and bye bye.